What happens when a federal judge tries to silence a woman of faith and instead sparks a national movement? In a stunning real-life courtroom drama, Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary in history, was fined $500 for wearing a cross. But instead of backing down, she struck back with an $800 million lawsuit that sent shockwaves through the U.S. judicial system and sent the judge running for the border. But before we dive into this story, I want to hear from you. Comment down below, where in the world are you watching from? Let's light up this comment section. And hey, if you love stories with high drama, power shifts, and the kind of moments that leave people speechless, you're in the right place. Tap that subscribe button right now. Hit the notification bell so you never miss when we drop the next chapter in these powerful, untold stories. In this explosive video, we follow the gripping story of how Karoline Leavitt turned a moment of persecution into a full-blown national reckoning. With viral media strategy, whistleblower leaks, and courtroom revelations, this isn't just a legal battle. It's a powerful movement for religious freedom and accountability in America's courtrooms. From D.C. court chaos to international headlines, this is how one woman flipped the system on its head. In the heart of Washington, D.C., inside the cold, marble halls of the district court, a storm was about to be unleashed, one that would shake the very foundations of the American legal system. It began quietly, with a $500 fine. Judge Charles Hargrove, a name once whispered with reverence in legal circles, handed it down to Karoline Leavitt, a bold, 27-year-old press secretary sent by President Trump to observe a tense lawsuit involving Christians banned from praying publicly. But it wasn't her voice or political stance that drew the judge's wrath. It was the small silver cross hanging around her neck. In front of a full courtroom, Judge Hargrove didn't just issue the fine. He humiliated her. Labeling her a fanatic and declaring the cross doesn't belong here, he wielded the gavel not as a tool of justice, but as a weapon of ideological bias. The room went silent, stunned not by the fine itself, but by the blatant hostility toward an expression of faith. Karoline didn't flinch. She stepped out of the courtroom, called her lawyer, and launched a bombshell, an $800 million lawsuit against Judge Hargrove and the D.C. court system for defamation and violation of her First Amendment rights. And just like that, a quiet act of courtroom censorship exploded into a political and legal firestorm. As the press struggled to grasp the scale of the legal counterattack, Karoline had already set her plan into motion. While media outlets argued the legality of her claims, she reframed the conversation entirely. This wasn't about just one woman or one courtroom. This was about religious freedom under fire. Social media ignited. Hashtags surged. News anchors debated her every move. Half the nation saw her as a warrior for constitutional rights. The other accused her of stoking political flames. But no one could ignore her. Judge Hargrove, once untouchable in his robe and gavel, found himself at the center of a scandal. And Karoline? She wasn't backing down. She was just getting started. Karoline Leavitt wasn't just fighting a case. She was launching a full-blown counterstrike. The moment she walked out of that courtroom with a $500 fine hanging over her, she knew this wasn't just personal. It was ideological. It was constitutional. She didn't waste time sulking. She picked up her phone and made 2 calls that would shake Washington to its core. The first was to Rachel Harper, a conservative legal firebrand known in political circles as the Judge Hunter. Rachel was infamous for her brutal efficiency and ability to tear through corrupt bureaucracies like a buzzsaw. Within hours, she arrived at Karoline's office, her blonde hair in a tight bun, a stack of files under one arm, and a look of absolute focus. "Hargrave isn't just going after you," Rachel said flatly. "He's a pawn, a tool. The liberal elite are using him to take a shot at Trump, and you're the closest target." Karoline listened. Her jaw clenched as Rachel laid out a daring plan. Charge Judge Hargrove with intentional defamation and sue the D.C. court system for enabling systemic anti-religious bias. And not just sue. Force a federal court to fast-track the proceedings, demanding immediate document production and transparency. A bold move, one that courts rarely agree to. But then, something extraordinary happened. The court approved it. Just 24 hours later, Judge Hargrove received an official order. He had 48 hours to hand over every document, email, and record related to his actions in Karoline's case. It was a seismic shift. The judge who once held the gavel now had it turned against him. Karoline wasn't done. Her second call was to Jake Torres, the digital strategist behind some of the most viral moments of Trump's 2024 campaign. Jake was a wizard with optics and algorithms, a man who could turn a whisper into a cultural wildfire. She told him 5 words that would change everything. Jake, make hack judge on trial viral. Jake didn't blink. Within the hour, he was mobilizing his army of TikTokers, YouTubers, and meme makers. The original courtroom footage of Karoline being fined for her cross was clipped, edited, captioned, and blasted across the internet. The moment she stood at the defendant's podium, cross gleaming and voice unwavering, hit like lightning. The hashtag Judge on Trial caught fire, 50,000 mentions in less than a day. One clip showed her staring down the judge, with a TikTok caption that read, "She stood for faith, he hid behind power." It was raw, emotional, viral. Meanwhile, inside his dimly lit office, Judge Hargrove sat behind his desk, watching the firestorm unfold. TV screens flashed images of Karoline on the news. His inbox flooded with emails, some supportive, most not. His hands shook as he opened messages from judicial colleagues, some urging him to issue a statement, others simply saying, "You need to fix this." "This is just a young girl's stunt," he muttered under his breath. But even he didn't believe it anymore. Desperate, he called Judge Ellen Carver, a longtime ally with silver hair and a voice like cold steel. "She's got the media. The court's breathing down my neck." "What does she even want?" he asked, panic creeping into his voice. "Calm down, Charles," Carver replied. "I'll put pressure on the witnesses. She can't win without evidence." But she underestimated how quickly the walls were closing in. That same day, an anonymous email landed in Karoline's inbox. It was from Ethan Brooks, an IT staffer at the D.C. court. The subject line was simple: "You'll want to see this." Attached was a PDF. Karoline opened it and her heart began to pound. It was a chain of internal emails between Hargrove and Judge Carver, plotting to teach her a lesson. One line struck like a dagger. "Target her cross. It'll throw the conservatives into chaos." Karoline's eyes narrowed. She forwarded the file to Rachel and then to Jake. "Go public. Now," she wrote. By that evening, Fox News ran the headline, "D.C. Judge Conspired to Smear White House Press Secretary." The hashtag exploded. Judge on Trial surpassed 100,000 mentions. Screenshots of the email were everywhere. Supporters poured into the streets. Commenters called her a hero, a warrior for religious liberty. The opposition called her a manipulator. But no one was silent. Inside Hargrove's apartment, the fallout was immediate. He sat alone, eyes wide, as the story exploded across every major outlet. He rushed to his laptop, furiously trying to delete emails from the court server, hoping to bury the trail. But it was too late. A red message flashed on his screen. "System has saved copies." Ethan Brooks, tucked in the far corner of the courthouse's IT office, smiled to himself as he sent another tip, this time to Linda Martinez, a senior investigator with the D.C. Judicial Council. She was known for her sharp mind and zero tolerance for judicial misconduct. She didn't hesitate. "If he's deleting evidence," she told her team, "he's committing a federal crime." Martinez assembled her task force. The case had now escalated into a full-scale judicial probe. Inside the courthouse, the tide was turning. Miss Thompson, the court clerk, photocopied her handwritten notes and quietly slipped them into her bag. She knew she couldn't stay silent much longer. James Wilson, a security officer who had seen Hargrove's actions firsthand, leaned over to a colleague and said quietly, "She's doing the right thing, and he knows it." Back at the White House, Rachel walked into Karoline's office with an update. "The court just authorized a search of Hargrove's chambers," she said, placing a thick stack of legal documents on the desk. "We're going to get everything." Karoline touched the silver cross on her chest. The weight of the country's eyes didn't make her flinch, it made her stronger. The judge who tried to make her an example was now running out of options. And the young woman he underestimated? Karoline Leavitt's case was no longer a lawsuit. It had become a full-scale movement. Her resolve had lit a spark that now blazed through the streets of Washington, D.C., igniting protests, headlines, and an online wildfire. But the fire needed fuel, and that fuel came from the brave few on the inside. That night, under the dim lighting of a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city, Karoline met Miss Thompson, the court clerk who had risked everything to reach out. She arrived looking over her shoulder, her tightly bunned hair and anxious eyes betraying the weight of what she was about to hand over. She slid a worn leather notebook across the table without a word. Karoline opened it and flipped through the pages, her heart speeding up. Inside were meticulous notes taken over the course of 12 years. Each page was a chronicle of subtle injustices, fines issued for prayer pins, veiled warnings to Muslim women for wearing headscarves, disciplinary actions against Christians for crosses. In one case, a man had been fined $400 for a prayer pin. In another, a high school student had been reprimanded for wearing a rosary necklace. There were dozens of similar stories, all documented, all real. "He finds any excuse to punish faith," Thompson whispered, eyes scanning the cafe nervously. "But when someone comes into court wearing a shirt that says something vulgar, he lets it slide. Laughs about it, even." Karoline's grip tightened around the notebook. "This is gold," she said, her voice low but resolute. "If he finds out I gave this to you." Thompson started, her voice trembling. "I'm out of a job." Karoline placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You're doing the right thing," she said, "and I will protect you." Meanwhile, inside the D.C. District Court's archival chambers, Linda Martinez, veteran investigator for the Judicial Council, stood under cold fluorescent lights. In front of her was an iron lockbox labeled Internal Records Hargrove. Without hesitation, she ordered her assistant to open it. Inside, Linda found what she was looking for: a thick black folder, Hargrove's personal file, containing internal case data and private notes. Page after page revealed a disturbing trend: over 200 cases involving fines for religious expression, disproportionately targeting Christians. The real kicker was a handwritten note on the inside flap in Hargrove's own script: "Keep the courtroom clean of fanaticism." This wasn't just neglect, this was intent. She immediately called James Wilson, a court officer who'd worked under Hargrove for years. "You've seen this happening, haven't you?" she asked. "I counted 25 cases last year alone," he said in a low voice. He fined crosses, prayer bracelets, anything religious, double what he fined other violations. The web of injustice was no longer just a theory, it was fact. Back at the White House, Karoline received a scanned copy of the black file. As she read each entry, her anger grew. She didn't hesitate. She called Jake Torres. "Post it. Every page, every word," she ordered. "The public needs to see this for themselves." Within half an hour, the hashtag Judge on Trial shot past 300,000 mentions. People weren't just reading, they were enraged. Viral tweets flashed across screens. "Hargrove finds crosses but ignores vulgar shirts, he has to go." Karoline went live on Newsmax. Her eyes burned with conviction. "This is what we've uncovered," she said, holding up the report. "Judge Hargrove isn't neutral. He isn't fair. He's an oppressor of faith." Back at Hargrove's apartment, the walls seemed to close in around him. He watched the headlines roll across the screen. His name wasn't just being dragged, it was being dismantled. His phone buzzed with texts from colleagues distancing themselves. He reached for his laptop and tried to delete his emails, hoping to erase the digital trail. But it was too late. A message flashed on his screen: "System has saved copies." Across town, Ethan Brooks, the quiet IT technician who had worked in the court's back offices for years, sat at his desk with a small, discreet smile. He had just tipped off Linda Martinez with a trove of recovered emails. She reviewed the files and immediately called her team into action. "If Hargrove deletes anything now, he's in direct violation of federal law," she said. "No more waiting." Inside the D.C. courthouse, the pressure mounted. Miss Thompson quietly photocopied additional notes from her desk drawer and slipped them into her purse. James Wilson, standing by the courtroom entrance, turned to a colleague and said, "Hargrove was wrong. Leavitt's doing what's right." Back at the White House, Karoline gathered her team. Rachel Harper entered with more evidence, her voice electric. "The court just issued a search of Hargrove's chambers," she announced. "We're about to uncover even more." Karoline nodded, her hand resting over the silver cross at her collar. It wasn't just a symbol anymore, it was armor. That same day, Linda Martinez stood in the court's basement archive, thumbing through the newly recovered documents. A small iron box marked internal Hargrove was pried open to reveal another set of files. She snapped a photo of one handwritten note. "Leavitt's too strong, must leave." She forwarded it to Karoline with a single message. He knew he'd lost. Meanwhile, on the internet, the story was unstoppable. TikTokers reenacted Hargrove's now infamous courtroom outburst. Viral edits paired Karoline's courtroom moments with cinematic soundtracks. One video had already passed 3 million views. Jake Torres ran into Karoline's office, his face lit up. "Thompson just reached out. She has everything." Karoline turned slowly from the window, her eyes steeled by what was to come. "Then we're ready," she said. Hargrove didn't know it yet, but the walls were closing in, and the woman he tried to humiliate was about to turn his gavel into his guillotine. The federal courtroom in Washington, D.C. was overflowing with tension. Outside, a wave of protesters held up signs that read, "Faith over fear" and "Hack Judge on trial," their chants echoing faintly through the courthouse's thick walls. Inside, sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting solemn rays across the polished wooden floor. Reporters packed the gallery, their pens ready, cameras discreetly recording. At the plaintiff's table sat Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary in history. Her navy blazer was immaculate, the silver cross on her chest gleaming defiantly. Her expression was calm, focused, unshaken. At the defense table sat Judge Charles Hargrove, the once respected federal judge now stripped of all dignity. His shoulders slumped, his hands trembled. His eyes darted toward the door as if hoping this might all still somehow vanish. Judge Amelia Ruiz called the courtroom to order with a thunderous bang of the gavel. Known for her unwavering fairness, her presence alone demanded silence. "Proceed with the plaintiff," she commanded. Rachel Harper stood, tall and composed, and immediately projected an image onto the courtroom screen, the infamous black file. Page after page showed Hargrove's long history of targeting religious symbols, crosses, prayer beads, pins, 250 cases over 6 years, 80% of them against Christians. The data wasn't circumstantial, it was a pattern. She walked the jury through each damning piece. A man fined for a prayer pin, a student cited for wearing a rosary, and then the bombshell, Hargrove's handwritten note found in the file. "Religion is a threat." Audible gasps swept the courtroom. Rachel didn't stop. She played a clip of Hargrove's voice recorded during Karoline's initial court appearance, where he sneered and called her a fanatic for wearing a cross. Then came Miss Thompson's notebook, listing inconsistencies in his punishments. Then Senator Daniel Klein's email to Hargrove, advising him to destroy Leavitt, she's Trump's weak point. Finally, Rachel revealed the encrypted messages recovered by Ethan Brooks, clearly showing coordination between Hargrove and Judge Ellen Carver, with one of them reading, "Target her cross, it'll cause chaos." The courtroom was electric. Judge Ruiz called for order, but the atmosphere was beyond control. The buzz in the gallery felt like the edge of a revolution. Then it was Karoline's turn to take the stand. She walked with steady steps, taking her oath, and stood tall as she looked into the jury's eyes. "Judge Hargrove didn't just fine me for wearing a cross," she began, her voice steady. "He turned his courtroom into a political weapon. He used his power to shame, silence, and humiliate me. And not just me, but anyone whose faith dared to show." She turned her gaze toward Hargrove, who couldn't meet her eyes. "He thought he could crush me. He thought I'd walk away quietly. But he forgot one thing. I was raised to stand for what's right, and I won't back down." She held up her cross, the chain catching the light. "This isn't a symbol of defiance, it's a symbol of truth." The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Rachel then called Hargrove to the stand. He looked like a man walking to his own execution. Sweat dotted his forehead. He fumbled through his answers. When asked if he targeted Karoline at the suggestion of Senator Klein, he muttered, "I was just following orders." The room erupted. Judge Ruiz didn't even bang the gavel. Everyone could feel the truth landing with force. Karoline stood again. "Following orders?" she repeated, her voice loud, resolute. "You fined my cross. You allowed profanity and hate, but drew the line at faith. This isn't just cowardice. This is betrayal." Tears streamed down Hargrove's face. He whispered, "I didn't mean to." But it was too late. Rachel called Ellen Carver next. She tried to keep her composure, but the weight of the evidence was too much. Faced with her own messages, "Hit her faith, it'll hurt," She broke. Yes, she said. We thought we could discredit her. We thought it would work. The room was silent as truth hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. The court took a brief recess. Outside, the crowd had swelled into the thousands. On social media, clips of Karoline confronting Hargrove began circulating. A video of her raising her voice in court, calling out injustice, went viral within minutes. One tweet read, "This is justice. This is what courage looks like." As Karoline stepped out of the courtroom, reporters surrounded her, but she remained composed. "This is bigger than me," she said. "This is about every American who's been told their beliefs don't belong in public. Today we made sure they do." Inside, Hargrove sat hollow and pale, his lawyer whispering in a panic. He knew the verdict was coming. He knew the damage was irreversible. He had tried to bury a cross, but it became a beacon instead. Karoline returned to the White House to a quiet celebration. Staff clapped, and Jake Torres ran in with the latest data. "You're a legend," he told her. "They're calling you the legal lioness." She gave a tired smile, but her eyes still burned with fire. Her phone rang. It was Linda Martinez. "Hargrove's people are panicking," she said. "He might not even show up tomorrow." Karoline stood at her window looking out at the city. She just shook to its core. She touched the cross resting on her chest. "Let him run," she said. "He can't run from justice." And she meant it. Karoline Leavitt's movement was no longer just sweeping the nation. It was reshaping it. Across social media, in living rooms, on courthouse steps, and in the minds of Americans who'd felt silenced for their faith, her voice had become a rallying cry. She had taken a $500 fine and turned it into an $800 million reckoning. And now, the man who'd tried to crush her was crumbling under the weight of it all. Late into the night, Karoline sat in her White House office, scrolling through message after message of support. One email stopped her cold. A mother had written, "Judge Hargrove fined my son for wearing a cross. You're our light." Karoline leaned back in her chair, heart warmed, but more focused than ever. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about everyone who'd been punished for simply believing. Outside, the protests were no longer confined to D.C. They were spreading to Virginia, North Carolina, Texas, state by state. The cry for reform was going national. Jake Torres reported that TikTok had gone nuclear. "You started a movement," he told her. She simply nodded. She knew. Meanwhile, Judge Hargrove was facing a very different kind of night. Alone in his apartment, he sat in silence, the walls pressing in tighter with every passing minute. The television, flickering with breaking news, showed clips of Karoline at the press conference, holding up the now-framed $500 fine receipt like a trophy of defiance. His face, meanwhile, was everywhere, but not as a judge, as a cautionary tale, as a meme. At a private airstrip just outside Washington, D.C., under the cover of a gray dawn sky, a black coat and a low baseball cap concealed a man once powerful, now desperate, Judge Charles Hargrove. A small private jet idled quietly nearby, its engines humming like a getaway heartbeat. Marco, the fixer, stood beside the aircraft, a gaunt figure with a voice like gravel. He motioned quickly. "Everything's ready. No one knows you're here. Stay off radar." Hargrove nodded, clutching a suitcase filled with documents, foreign currency, and whatever was left of his dignity. He climbed the stairs of the jet, his eyes wide with fear, but also hollow. He pulled out his phone one last time and opened the X app. There it was, his face plastered across trending posts. One meme showed him in a clown hat, the caption reading, "Judge Hargrove, hypocrite on the run." Another simply said, "Karoline speaks, he flees." He closed the phone and sat down, burying his head in his hands. The plane doors sealed shut. Back in D.C., Linda Martinez and her federal investigative team had arrived at Hargrove's apartment with a search warrant. The moment they entered, they found exactly what they needed: his personal laptop still open, unsaved data still retrievable. Inside were messages between him and Senator Daniel Klain. The encrypted app had saved fragments of their conversations. The attempt to cover it up had failed. A single handwritten note, stuffed under his desk, was quickly discovered. It read, "Leavitt's too strong, must leave." Linda snapped a photo and forwarded it to Karoline with a one-line message: he knew he lost. At the White House, Jake Torres burst through Karoline's office door, holding up his tablet. "We've got confirmation," he said, breathless. "Hargrove boarded the plane this morning. He's on his way to Switzerland." Karoline didn't flinch. She looked out the window at the city she'd shaken awake. "Let him run," she said, her voice like ice. "Justice will catch up." And it would. Hours later, news of the flight broke. A TikTok video went viral, juxtaposing footage of the private jet taking off with clips of Karoline's fiery courtroom testimony. The caption read, "Hargrove runs, Karoline stands." It passed 3 million views in a day. International media joined in. A Swiss reporter snapped photos of Hargrove sneaking into a luxury villa in Geneva, registered under a fake name. CNN International ran the headline, "Fugitive Judge, U.S. Legal Scandal Goes Global." Inside his villa, Hargrove turned on the TV. His own face greeted him, with anchors calling him a disgraced coward and the face of judicial corruption. One commentator said, "He tried to silence a woman of faith. Instead, she silenced him." He threw the remote against the wall, but no one was listening anymore. Back in D.C., Ellen Carver was facing the consequences of her own. The Judicial Council suspended her indefinitely and launched a formal investigation. Young legal clerks at the courthouse began resigning. One tweeted, "I won't work in a system built on fear and silence." The court was imploding from within. At a press conference, Linda Martinez stood before reporters and declared, "Judge Charles Hargrove violated federal law. He deleted evidence and fled the country. He will be brought back. No judge is above the law." Outside, cheers erupted. Protesters lifted signs high into the sky. "Karoline leads, Hargrove fails." Later that day, Karoline stepped to the White House podium, the American flag behind her, the city roaring with support outside. She held up the framed $500 fine and said, calmly and powerfully, "This is where it started, but it ends with victory. Hargrove fled, but justice knows no borders." Cameras flashed. News anchors called it one of the most powerful statements of the year. Meanwhile, in his villa, Hargrove opened his laptop to move funds from a private offshore account. A message popped up, "Transaction blocked by U.S. Justice Department." A second message followed from Marco, the fixer. "They know you're here. You need to leave, now." Panic flooded Hargrove's chest. He peeked through the blinds. Cameras, journalists, Swiss authorities. He closed the curtains, hands shaking. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was cornered. And Karoline Leavitt, armed with truth, resolve, and a nation behind her, wasn't finished. From a courtroom in D.C. to a villa in Geneva, Karoline Leavitt's fight had traveled across oceans, across headlines, across hearts. But what began as a personal battle for religious freedom was now something much bigger. It was a nationwide awakening. A movement not only for justice, but for reform. Back in Geneva, Charles Hargrove was running out of time. The fixer's message was clear. "They know you're here. Leave now." But the exits were closing. Outside his luxury villa, reporters had begun to gather. Drones buzzed overhead. Swiss outlets were airing round-the-clock coverage, calling him a disgraced American judge in hiding. Hargrove looked out the window and saw cameras trained on his front door. The world was watching. Back in D.C., Karoline stood in her office, calm amid the storm. The city glowed outside her window. Jake Torres entered, holding his tablet like a war drum. "You did it," he said, unable to hide the grin. "He's a global laughingstock." She nodded, touching the silver cross at her collar. "This isn't the end," she said. "It's only the beginning." Word of Hargrove's failed bank transfer spread quickly. He had tried to wire money to an offshore account, likely to fund his exile, but the U.S. Department of Justice had frozen every penny. He had nowhere to run, no way to hide. And now, the people he once ruled from the bench were turning the gavel against him. Linda Martinez, now leading the federal investigation into Hargrove and Carver, held a press conference outside the D.C. courthouse. Her voice was sharp, unwavering. Judge Hargrove committed obstruction of justice when he attempted to delete evidence after being served with a federal order. He fled the country. That makes him a fugitive. We will bring him back. Cheers broke out as reporters rushed to broadcast the soundbite. Protesters outside the courthouse lifted signs high. "Karoline leads, Hargrove runs." That evening, Karoline stepped up to the White House press podium with the U.S. flag billowing behind her. Her voice rang clear. Justice does not stop when the guilty flee. It chases them down, it exposes them, and it reforms what they've broken. She raised the original $500 fine, now framed before the cameras. "This was meant to silence me. Instead, it gave a voice to millions." The clip went viral instantly. X exploded. TikTok ran remix after remix. One video paired her line with cinematic music, captioned, "Karoline didn't just win, she rewrote the rules." In Geneva, Hargrove sat frozen on a couch, his laptop open in front of him. CNN International played in the background, his face, again. The anchor's voice cut through like a blade. From the bench to the shadows, Judge Hargrove is a global example of what happens when power is abused. Then came the next blow, an international sighting confirmed. Swiss reporters had tracked his alias, his villa, and his fixer. The pressure mounted. He drew the curtains. His hands trembled. This wasn't exile anymore. It was exile in a spotlight. Back in the States, change had already begun to take root. In Texas, the state legislature passed a bill protecting religious symbols in courtrooms. Florida followed. Then Ohio. The bills referenced Leavitt v. Hargrove directly. Governors tweeted public support. Texas's governor posted, "Thank you, Karoline, for igniting the fire of justice." At Freedom Park, the same park where the original lawsuit about public prayer had erupted, supporters now gathered in celebration. Crosses were lifted, songs were sung. A makeshift stage had been built, and Karoline was invited to speak. She stepped up as hundreds clapped and cheered. "Hargrove wanted to make faith something we hide," she said. "But this park today is a symbol of freedom." The crowd erupted. Banners waved, "Freedom over fear." Soon after, the U.S. Department of Justice extended an invitation to Karoline to serve as a special advisor on religious liberty. She accepted. With her new role came a new mission: to make sure no judge, no official, no agency ever again tried to bury faith under legal pretense. The messages kept pouring in. One from a young lawyer in Ohio read, "I've opened a free clinic for victims of religious discrimination. You inspired me." Another came from a little girl. "Hargrove fined me for wearing my prayer bracelet. You're my hero." Karoline replied, "You're the hero, for standing firm in your belief." Meanwhile, Linda Martinez finalized the report that would become one of the most consequential in recent judicial history. It confirmed that Hargrove had violated multiple federal laws and that Judge Ellen Carver had conspired to intimidate religious individuals from the bench. Carver was permanently removed from office. The D.C. court system implemented sweeping changes, including mandatory First Amendment training for all judges and a full rewrite of internal disciplinary procedures. Transparency became law. Oversight became mandatory. A new judicial ethics committee was formed, with Linda Martinez at its head. A young judge tweeted, "Karoline made us look in the mirror. She reminded us of what justice is supposed to mean." TikTokers stitched together videos of Freedom Park glowing at night, intercut with Karoline's voice. Captions read, "From cross to constitution. Faith isn't fragile, it's powerful." Karoline stood by her window that evening, watching the D.C. lights glitter like fireflies. Jake walked in with more numbers. "Protests have now spread to California," he said. "You're trending worldwide." She didn't smile, she just nodded. "This isn't about going viral," she said. "This is about never letting this happen again." She checked her notifications. One caught her eye, a post from a law student. "I'm studying law because of Leavitt. She showed us justice isn't dead." That night, Karoline stood before Congress. The stage lights were hot. The room was full, and her voice was calm, powerful, unwavering. "We must protect the First Amendment from the slow erosion of apathy and power. If we don't, we risk losing the very foundation of our republic. Justice isn't a luxury, it's a duty, and faith is not something to apologize for." When she finished, lawmakers stood and applauded. Across the country, the clip was watched by millions. In the front row, Congresswoman Elise Stefanik stood clapping, eyes glistening. She turned to a colleague and said quietly, "We just watched history." The roar of applause still echoed through the chambers of Congress as Karoline Leavitt stepped down from the podium. Her speech on judicial reform had just ended, but its impact was still rippling outward. The room had been full of lawmakers from both sides of the aisle, many of whom had watched the viral clips, read the court documents, and witnessed the movement unfold in real time. But hearing her speak, live, about the abuse of power, about faith, and about justice, that was something else entirely. On X, a congressman tweeted within minutes, "Leavitt didn't just take on Judge Hargrove, she's reshaping the future of the judiciary." That sentiment wasn't hyperbole. Across the country, Karoline's name had become synonymous with truth, spoken to power. She wasn't just a press secretary anymore. She was a reformer, a symbol, a movement in motion. As the cameras clicked and the crowd thinned, Karoline stepped backstage. A staffer handed her a phone with a flood of new messages. One email stood out. It was from a third-year law student. "I've watched every hearing. Your courage made me apply to law school. I want to protect the Constitution like you did." Karoline read it slowly, her heart warmed, but her focus remained sharp. She knew this was more than legacy. It was leadership. It was responsibility. Far away in the shadows of a Geneva villa, Charles Hargrove remained a prisoner in everything but name. He had become a fugitive, not just of the law, but of reputation, of relevance, of redemption. But even now, cornered, disgraced, and despised, he still tried to salvage the smallest sliver of image. He sent an apology email through a secure, encrypted channel, addressed not to the courts, not to Congress, but to Karoline Leavitt. "I was wrong," it read. "I let pressure, politics, and pride cloud my judgment. If there is any way I can help, training, reform, remote participation, I offer it. I want to make things right." Karoline stared at the message for a long moment. Then she replied with just one line: "Justice accepts reform, but never forgets." She immediately forwarded it to Linda Martinez, who was still spearheading the Judicial Reform Task Force. Linda read it and scoffed. "He still thinks he can negotiate with history," she muttered. "He's already written his chapter." The email leak spread quickly. The viral post read, "Too late. Leavitt won. Apologies can't erase tyranny." The court of public opinion had already rendered its final verdict. That night, Karoline stood by her window, watching the Capitol glow in the distance. The sky was clear, stars blinking down as if in quiet approval. She whispered to herself, "Justice doesn't come on its own. You have to fight for it." Across the country, the effects of her fight continued to ripple outward. In Texas, more courthouses now proudly displayed the Bill of Rights beside their benches. In Florida, new legislation required judges to take annual constitutional training with a renewed focus on First Amendment protections. In Ohio, law schools hosted forums titled "The Leavitt Effect: Law, Faith, and Justice." Even in schools, the culture had shifted. A student in Utah wrote a message on her prayer bracelet and posted a picture online, "Wearing this for Karoline." A pastor on X posted, "Leavitt taught us that faith doesn't bend, that truth doesn't bow, that justice, when it speaks, echoes through the soul of a nation." Jake Torres walked into her office, tablet glowing in hand. "You're still trending in 20 countries," he said, smiling. "They're calling you the constitutional torch." She gave a small smile, but didn't bask in it. "They called Hargrove a judge once too," she said. "Titles don't mean anything without truth." The protests had reached California, where students and clergy marched peacefully outside courthouses with signs that read, "Thanks to Leavitt," and "Hack, cross not crime." In D.C., the Judicial Reform Council unveiled new transparency dashboards for the public to review judge performance, fines, and legal patterns. Linda Martinez was appointed chair of the Oversight Committee, and her first act was to permanently bar Charles Hargrove from ever practicing law in any U.S. jurisdiction. A young federal judge tweeted, "Leavitt forced us to face the rot. Now we plant something better in its place." TikTokers created mashups of Karoline's congressional speech with cinematic music and protest footage, captions reading, "From the cross to Congress, she didn't break, she built." And the final moment, simple, powerful, came when Karoline posted a message of thanks. "To everyone who stood beside me, from courtrooms to campuses to kitchen tables, thank you. We didn't just win a case, we reminded America that justice still breathes." The post exploded. It became the most shared political message of the year. That chapter of the story was closing. But Karoline's future was just beginning. She had turned a courtroom confrontation into a national reckoning. She had faced down a system many thought was untouchable. She had stood up for millions who had once stood alone. And now, she was leading them forward. Karoline Leavitt had done the unthinkable. What began as a personal fight for religious freedom had evolved into a national movement. Her victory wasn't just in the courtroom. It was in the hearts of Americans who saw her stand tall for truth, who believed that justice could still be served even against the most powerful. As the dust settled, the ripple effects were clear. Across the nation, Judicial reforms were taking shape. Faith was being honored once again in public spaces, and Americans felt a renewed sense of pride in their First Amendment rights. In Texas, Florida, Ohio, and countless other states, new laws were passed, judges trained, and faith wasn't just tolerated, it was protected. But for Karoline, the battle wasn't over. Her victory against Judge Hargrove wasn't just about one case, it was about creating a system where faith and justice would never again be at odds. As she looked out over the crowd at the White House press room, she knew the real work was only beginning. Justice doesn't stop when the guilty flee, Karoline had said. It continues until the very last stone is turned. With that, she promised to continue the fight, not just for herself, but for every American who believed in a fairer, freer future. And as the nation watched, they knew that Karoline Leavitt wasn't just a moment in history. She was the start of something much bigger, a movement that would echo through the halls of justice for generations to come. Thank you for watching and following Karoline Leavitt's incredible journey. What began as a fight for justice has sparked a nationwide movement, a movement that reminds us all. Justice is not just a right, it's a responsibility we must all stand for. If you believe in what Karoline's story represents, faith, courage, and the unshakable power of truth, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with those who need to hear it. Together, we can keep fighting for a better tomorrow. Until next time, stay strong, stay committed, and remember, justice will always find its way. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.